Good day, everyone. It's about 1 minute past the hour, and I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning to our friends in America. Good evening to our friends in Asia. On behalf of the Mobility Development Group and all of our members, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar today. My name is Doug Martell. Thank you for joining us. We promise that you will find the topic engaging and that we will take less than an hour of your time. We have quite a lot of material to cover today, so why don't we go ahead and get started. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, just a procedural reminder. Throughout the webinar, please provide your questions and comments in the Q&A window on the right of your screen. You'll see a chat box and you'll see a Q&A button. So please, any questions that you have, please type them in and submit them to our presenter or all of the panelists. And any questions that we don't get to, we promise to answer in a personal email. So with that, we're very fortunate to have with us today Tony Lutz, Director of Business Development at Qualcomm Technologies, Inc. Tony leads mobile network operator business development activities for QTI's products in small cells and LTE in unlicensed spectrum. Welcome, Tony, and thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks, Kevin, for hosting this. I do work in a part of Qualcomm that a lot of people don't really know about. Qualcomm's known for doing chipsets for mobile devices, but we also build silicon that goes into small cells, or they've been called various names over time. You may have heard femtocells, picocells, microcells, but basically in the 3GPP world, a small cell is what's called a home eNode B, and it's just a small version of a macro cell that is used to either boost capacity or coverage in an area, usually where there's a dense hotspot type environment. So with that, I'm going to take you through a little bit about small cells. I'll also talk about how small cells enable things like LTE unlicensed and a technology that we recently announced called MulteFire, which allows you to run LTE in unlicensed spectrum even if you don't have any licensed spectrum paired with it. So, I'll just skip the title slide and go on to what we call the 1000X vision. We've been talking about this for a few years now, so I just want to sort of set the stage with this. All of the operators on the call here, I'm sure you're well aware that the demand for data is growing astronomically. The Cisco quote that's been used quite a number of times is, 2/3 of the mobile traffic will be video by 2017. And Gartner right now is predicting there'll be 8 billion smartphones on the network by 2018 and a total of 25 billion connected devices globally by 2020. So, I mean, what this means is just that we as an industry have to come up with methods to deal with this astronomical growth in data, and small cells is one of the ways to help address the data demand. For some reason, my slide, there we go. So, as I mentioned, to address the 1000X challenge, small cells is definitely one of the ways that can help densify the network, reuse the spectrum in a cell-splitting manner to increase capacity or boost coverage, in addition to trying to get higher efficiency and drive more physics out of the existing network. And we do that through things like carrier aggregation. We've got 802.11ax coming, as well as multi-user MIMO. So this is basically trying to drive higher efficiency out of the existing network. And then, of course, more spectrum. And since spectrum is a scarce resource, this is one of the reasons why we're looking at things like, at least in North America, the 3.5 gigahertz band is going to become a shared access spectrum. It's currently occupied by the Navy, especially on the coast for the littoral radars. but that's not used all the time. So the FCC is in the process of allowing the 3.5 gigahertz band to be used by not only the incumbents, but there'll be a portion of the band that will be available to others. And then we're also, of course, looking at the 5.8 gigahertz band that's currently used by Wi-Fi, and we're looking at ways that we can use that band to operate LTE as well. And so, you know, we believe with the combination of more small cells, higher efficiency, as well as additional spectrum, we can deal with the tsunami of data. So I'll talk a little bit more about the small cells aspect. So there's various methods in which small cells can be deployed. Traditionally, they've been deployed by the operators themselves, especially in an outdoor fashion. So if we look to the right of this slide, this is the more traditional way in which small cells have been used in, you know, dense urban hotspots, whether those are indoors in an urban outdoor area or in a shopping mall. User-deployed small cells are traditionally called femtocells. You know, this is basically just like deploying a Wi-Fi access point, as long as you've got backhaul available and power. For instance, T-Mobile just announced last week their cell spot. It's available to any T-Mobile subscriber. You just basically plug it in, it self-configures, it doesn't have to be technician deployed. We sometimes refer to these as neighborhood small cells. The idea is that the coverage can go from the inside out. So that coverage, you plug in your small cell, and it can also serve other subscribers of that operator's network that are walking by on the street. It's a configurable option. It's up to the operator if they want to allow that, or if they they can keep it private just for the users. And then enterprises, which could be deployed, we call partner deployed here by an enterprise. An example being like Spider Cloud. Verizon's using them right now for a number of enterprise deployments. It may be deployed not by the operator, but by a third party. We're seeing this coming up in a lot of cities right now as part of some cities are putting up moratoriums. They don't want additional infrastructure up, so we're looking at ways to incorporate this small cell into things like lampposts, bus shelters, etc. And they maybe end up being deployed by the city, and it becomes an offload network to the operator. So these are just some of the use cases or deployment models in which small cells are used today. A little bit of just to sort of identify the different segments, the way we look at the different markets for small cells. I talked about the neighborhood small cells, residential small business. The big difference here is that these are, low power units. It's a very cost sensitive market. Most the times they're not multi-mode. They're just going to have 4G and maybe Wi-Fi, depending on the operator and the OEM, and serve a small number of users, like 8 to 16. In the enterprise world, we need to often include multi-mode, 3G, 4G, Wi-Fi. It's still somewhat dependent on the macro. We've got to be, because it depends if it's deployed in the same spectrum band or in a dedicated spectrum band, and just a higher power, higher number of users. Then when we get to the outdoor, they've got to be more planned with the existing macro network, and higher output power and serving a higher number of users. In this case, we say up to 256, which is sort of what we've seen the limits of the outdoor small cells use. Let's go to the next slide. One of the technologies that Qualcomm has implemented is, we call it UltraSON. It's a suite of software that assists in deploying small cells in a somewhat unplanned, hyperdense fashion. So one of the things that sort of held back small cells growth in the past is the need to go send a technician out, configure them, and the labor cost ends up being higher than the cost of the actual small cell. So what UltraSON does, it includes the 3GPP-defined self-organizing or self-optimizing network features. It enables the small cells to boot up, sense the other cells around them, adjust their power levels accordingly so there will not be interference. It also it knows when a user's on one small cell. If a small cell might be too congested, it might move this user to a nearby cell. It can also sense the backhaul. If, say, somebody's watching Netflix in the house and the backhaul's constrained, UltraSON can help direct that UE to move to a small cell that might not be backhaul constrained. So there's a suite of features that UltraSON supports, and for OEMs that are building small cells based on our chips that we supply, the UltraSON software is part of our stack. In terms of industry traction, so today there's a little over 400 operators that have deployed LTE globally. We've got over 75 operators currently using small cells for LTE. A lot of them are in the home. 47 of those 75 are using them in a home setting, 70 in an enterprise or public building, 23 outdoors, and then 30 to serve sort of rural or remote areas where there might not be existing macro coverage. So I'm going to show a short video now to talk about how small cells can be used to help enable LTE-U, and then I'll go a little more into details about LTE-U itself. Okay, so in that video, there was it went fairly quick, but it showed a few different flavors of using LTE and unlicensed spectrum, and I'll walk through those a little more now. One of the reasons that the 5 gigahertz spectrum is ideal for small cells is one is just it's a high frequency band, so due to propagation, it's going to work best in dense areas where you may not have macro coverage. It's unlikely to deploy 5 gigahertz on a macro site. So small cells, because of they're somewhat limited in transmit power, as well as there's a high amount of spectrum available in the 5 gigahertz band. There's over 500 megahertz, depending on the region of the world that we're talking about. There's fairly wide bandwidth, and because of the actual physical size of the units, they're easy to deploy in venues, maybe under the seats, in homes, supermarkets, etc. So we saw this in the video. Essentially, what LTE unlicensed or LTE Wi-Fi aggregation, there are two different methods, both defined in Release 13. You're combining you're doing carrier aggregation of LTE plus Wi-Fi and allowing to have a much higher throughput and a better user experience. The difference between the LTE Wi-Fi link aggregation, or LWA as it's called in 3GPP, and LTE-U is that in LTE-U you're operating as a LTE waveform in the 5.8 gigahertz spectrum. In the LTE Wi-Fi link aggregation, you're basically, if you already have a large number of carrier deployed Wi-Fi, you're still operating Wi-Fi waveform in the 5.8 gigahertz band. You're doing carrier aggregation with LTE in a licensed band, but you're combining it at the PDCP layer as opposed to the PHY layer. So you still get very good benefits, and it really depends on the operator situation. For new deployments, we would suggest that you would use LTE-U or LAA, and I'll talk a little bit about the differences between the two there. It was quickly shown in the video, but the LTE-U and LAA are just two different forms of using LTE and unlicensed spectrum. LTE-U can be deployed in a Release 10, 11, 12 network per the specifications that were defined in the LTE-U forum. The LTE-U forum was composed of a number of industry players and included Verizon as an operator, Ericsson, Alcatel-Lucent, Samsung, as well as Qualcomm. And those specs and performance specifications are all available on the LTE-U forum website. LAA is a Release 13 flavor of LTE and unlicensed, and in certain markets like Europe and Japan, where there's a regulatory requirement for what's called listen before talk. Those markets are going to have to wait for LAA. Most of the rest of the world can deploy LTE-U based on Release 10, 11, or 12 in 3GPP. Okay, I sort of covered this as I was talking. So in LTE-U, it is a supplemental downlink only, so you're basically taking advantage of the carrier aggregation on the downlink. I believe it's Release 14 in 3GPP for LAA is going to define the use of the uplink as well. But both LAA and LTE-U, as they are defined today, are supplemental downlink mode only. And in the future, we'll see in Release 14 the ability to use LAA on the uplink as well. One of the things that's extremely important is that we have fair coexistence between and share the spectrum between Wi-Fi and LTE. And we've been doing a lot of testing. You saw some of it in the video. We've got a stress chamber where we've got a number of Wi-Fi access points, and we introduce one LTE-U node. And what we show is that the performance of the existing Wi-Fi access points stays constant, and you still add another node, and the throughput actually improves on that cell that's operating in an LTE unlicensed method. So we have to follow not only the regulations that are, regulatory in terms of, power bandwidth emission levels, and I mentioned that in certain markets like Japan and Europe, listen before talk is required, but we're going above and beyond what's required in a regulatory fashion and we're working with a number of industry players, not just in 3GPP, but cooperating together with the IEEE, the Wi-Fi Alliance, and others to ensure that the technologies can coexist in a peaceful manner. And we're putting very, very rigorous, I would say, test specifications in place. And I say we, it's we as an industry working together with a number of infrastructure vendors to define the coexistence and performance specifications. At MWC, even last year in February of 2015, almost every major infrastructure vendor was showing LTE-U in some fashion. Let's go to the next slide. So in terms of Qualcomm's role in the ecosystem, I mentioned we're working on both sides of the link. On the left side, you see our small cell chipset or system on chip, the FSM stands for femto station modem, as opposed to our MSMs, mobile station modems that are on the device side. We're working with a number of OEMs building products today that are based on that silicon. And then we also announced just in September our first modem on the handset side here called the X12 LTE Snapdragon chipset, and this is the industry's first announced LTE-U solution. So from an end-to-end perspective, we are ensuring that LTE-U can be commercialized as early as 2016. Again, just a few more details on the chipset here. So we've announced the support for LTE-U on this chipset. It has the ability to host an external Wi-Fi chipset if you want to have a design that actually includes both Wi-Fi and LTE in the same box. It's a multi-mode chipset, supports 3G and LTE. CSAT was quickly shown in the video. It stands for Carrier Sensing Adaptive Transmission. So that's sharing the medium in a time division fashion, turning it on and off. So if say that the specific channel you're using in 5.8 gigahertz is occupied by Wi-Fi, you can time share it for a short duration, turn it on LTE on, and then free it back up to Wi-Fi. And so that's a configurable parameter. It's based on the specific deployment in terms of what you want the on-off period to be. It also includes things like our UltraSON features, like interference cancellation, to assist in deploying the small cell in a situation where you're in a shared spectrum or what we call a co-channel deployment, where the macros and the small cells are sharing the same frequency. Now, this slide doesn't work extremely well in a webinar because it's intended to be animated and build. But what this is showing is on the left, unlicensed solutions or running LTE-U as well as carrier Wi-Fi solutions on the right, that they can all exist simultaneously. And we're building solutions really to support various deployment scenarios. It's going to be, so we have a very, very big Wi-Fi business at Qualcomm as well through Qualcomm and Theros. And so we're supporting LTE Wi-Fi call continuity. There'll be MulteFire operating LTE exclusively in the 5.8 gigahertz frequency, and I'll talk a little bit more about MulteFire in a couple of slides. But the point of this slide is that these technologies are going to coexist in parallel, and there's not one solution for any one operator, depending on the what's already been deployed in the specific spectrum situation, in the specific market, if there's any different regulatory concerns. So we'll see these various technologies coexisting for some time. We talked a little bit about the importance of being a very good neighbor to Wi-Fi, and based on the research and the studies that we've done, that so if you look on the left of the slide, we have two operators. They're both operating existing Wi-Fi networks. So that's the baseline we call 1X. And we turn one of the operators turns LTE-U on in their network. We actually see even the operator A gets a slight uplift, sort of neutral or slightly better performance in their network, and operator 2 experiences a 2X gain in median throughput with the introduction of LTE-U. So, and if both operators were to switch, they would both see approximately a 2X gain. On the next slide, this is actually this is showing in the orange the throughput on LTE versus the throughput on Wi-Fi when we deploy 5 gigahertz small cell. It's deployed in the exact same location. What you see here is that, especially at the cell edges, where there's an X, that means you're not getting, say, any throughput on Wi-Fi, or very low throughput at the cell edges, but you're still getting throughput on LTE. So because of the inherent physical characteristics of LTE, you're going to get a farther range and higher throughput when you deploy LTE in the same frequency band. I mentioned a little bit about the industry support for LTE-U previously. There's been not only the infrastructure vendors supporting it, but a number of operators have already announced their support for LTE-U. On this slide, we see T-Mo, Docomo. I mean, Verizon's been very vocal in their support for LTE-U. In 3GPP, not only Qualcomm, but many operators and vendors are very actively, that we're expecting the LAA spec to be finalized in the first half of 16. I already mentioned that the LTE Forum released the performance and coexistence specs that are publicly available in February of this year. Lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about MulteFire. We announced this, I believe it was in September, and this is basically using LTE in an unlicensed spectrum without having a licensed anchor. So this can offer, 4G performance to, operators that may or may not have spectrum. It will allow for new entrants to offer services, or in areas where there might be, say, a venue where it may not make sense to have 3 or 4 sets of equipment in there. It can be used in a Wi-Fi-like fashion, and bring LTE indoors in more of what we call like a neutral host fashion, where either the enterprise can operate that network independently and allow for devices to get LTE performance in an indoor fashion. And let's see, so I'm going to talk about this in MulteFire. So it doesn't have to be in the 5.8 gigahertz band. It can be in any sort of shared or unlicensed spectrum band. It's self-contained, so it's a separate network. So from a user perspective, it would look like you're just connecting to another Wi-Fi SSID, but it would be an LTE network. MulteFire, is still in the process, doesn't have a forum announced yet, but it will be worked on by a number of industry players. So it's, in terms of timing, it's a little further out than LTE-U or LAA. So in summary, we're working on a number of different technologies to help address the 1000X challenge. The Wi-Fi roadmap is continuing to evolve to address things like 802.11ax, 802.11ad, LTE-U and LAA. We talked about MulteFire. We believe that carrier aggregation of both licensed and unlicensed spectrum is critical to address the needs. We will continue to be very active in ensuring that Wi-Fi and LTE can coexist peacefully and both share the medium effectively. And we're committed to these convergent solutions going forward. So that's what I prepared for today, and I left plenty of time for Q&A. So
Thank you, Tony, for offering to be the keynote for our webinar today, and for providing your insights on the small cells revolution and LWA and LTE-U and LAA and MulteFire. As Tony mentioned, we have time for a few questions. If you have had a chance, please feel free to submit them in the chat box. If not, we'll go ahead and move on.
Yeah, I know it's a bit of alphabet soup. There's quite a few different things out there, so I hope it was clear. I'll try to maybe summarize one more time the different flavors of LTE unlicensed. So that LTE-U is what can be deployed today in all markets except Japan and Europe. And that can be deployed using your existing spectrum in addition to doing carrier aggregation with an unlicensed band. LAA is the Release 13 flavor of LTE and unlicensed, and then MulteFire is operating LTE without a licensed anchor. So the licensed anchor is important. So for both LTE-U and LAA, you need to have a licensed spectrum that you're combining with the unlicensed. MulteFire is where we introduce operating LTE in the unlicensed band without an anchor, and the anchor is where all your control. So maybe I didn't mention this. So the licensed spectrum is for all your control channel information. All security control channel is over the licensed band. You're just using the unlicensed band in the supplemental downlink mode to download to get a greater throughput on your downlink.
So, Tony, thank you again, and thank you to all of our attendees for being with us today. Please stay tuned for our next topical webinar coming very soon. And just a reminder, all of the Mobility Development Group members are invited to present webinars, and as well as contributing articles and advertisements to our meeting journal. If you're interested in becoming a member, if you're not already one, please visit our website. And just a reminder, you'll be able to review today's presentation on our website as well. So to conclude, thank you again, Tony Lutz and Qualcomm, and to all of our members and potential members for taking the time from your busy schedules to join us today. We're all very fortunate to be part of a rapidly expanding but turbulent wireless industry. The MDG is your forum to interact with other industry experts, to gain clarity, to gain direction that ensures your continued success and the continued success of your organization. So thank you all again, and we look forward to seeing you again very, very soon.